Alright, so I am going to begin with the oxygenation chapter. I do want you to review the terms at the beginning of the chapter. Respiration is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide during cellular metabolism. Gases move into and out of the lungs through pressure changes. There are 3 steps in the process of oxygenation: ventilation, perfusion, and diffusion. Ventilation is the process of moving gases into and out of the lungs. It requires coordination of the lungs and the thorax. What is the major inspiratory muscle of respiration? The diaphragm. The diaphragm is innervated by the phrenic nerve. That nerve exits the spinal cord. Where do you think it would exit the spinal cord at? Cervical, thoracic, or spinal? Or sacral? It would exit at the cervical at the 4th vertebrae. Now, perfusion, this is what is happening when our cardiovascular system is pumping oxygenated blood to the tissues and returning deoxygenated blood to the lungs. Diffusion moves the respiratory gases from one area to another. The work of breathing is the effort needed to expand and contract the lungs. How does a healthy, normal person breathe? Is it loud? It's quiet, and it should require minimal to no effort. Now, inspiration is stimulated by receptors in the aorta. Expiration depends on the recoil of the lungs. Expiration requires little or no work. Is expiration active or passive? Expiration would be passive, whereas inspiration would be active. Now, surfactant is a chemical that is produced to maintain the surface tension of the alveoli to keep them from collapsing. Individuals with COPD lose the recoil of the lungs and the thorax, which increases the work of breathing. Patients with pulmonary disease have decreased surfactant production, and they can develop atelectasis. Now, atelectasis is a collapse of the alveoli that prevents normal exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Why do patients with respiratory disorders use accessory muscles? What is the action of those muscles doing to help them breathe better? Those muscles help to increase lung volume during inspiration. Now, prolonged of those muscles results in fatigue, and they're not adequate for ventilation. Now, we have a term called compliance. Compliance is the ability of the lungs to expand easily. Would compliance decrease in individuals with diseases that affect their respiratory system? Yes, some examples might be fractured ribs, fibrosis, or pulmonary edema. Airway resistance is defined as the increase in pressure that happens as the airway diameter decreases from the mouth or nose down to the alveoli. Asthma, which causes airway obstruction, can increase airway resistance. When resistance increases, oxygen being delivered to the alveoli decreases. When is compliance considered bad? When it's increased or decreased? Decreased. Is increased airway resistance or decreased airway resistance, bad. Increased. Now, normal lung volume is different in each person because it's determined by age, gender, and height. We have three terms. We have tidal volume, residual volume, and forced vital capacity. Tidal volume is the amount of air exhaled following a normal inspiration. Residual volume is the amount of air left in the alveoli after a full expiration. Forced vital capacity is the maximum amount of air that can be removed from the lungs during forced expiration. Now, pulmonary circulation moves blood to and from the alveolar capillary membrane for gas exchange. It begins at the pulmonary artery. Here, the artery receives poorly oxygenated blood from the right ventricle. The blood then travels to the alveolar capillary membrane, and the exchange of respiratory gases occurs here. Now, oxygen-rich blood then circulates through the veins, returning to the left atrium. Respiratory gas exchange. Diffusion is the process to exchange of respiratory gases in the alveoli of the lungs and the capillaries of the body tissues. The thickness of the membrane affects the rate of diffusion. If a membrane has an increased thickness, do the respiratory gases go across the membrane at a faster rate? No, not if the membrane thickness is increased. Now, three things that influence the capacity of the blood to carry oxygen. The amount of dissolved oxygen in the plasma plays a role. The amount of hemoglobin plays a role. And the ability of the hemoglobin to bind with oxygen. The hemoglobin molecule combines with oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin. The deformation easily happens, which makes deoxyhemoglobin, allowing oxygen to enter tissues. Now, carbon dioxide diffuses into red blood cells and is rapidly hydrated into carbonic acid. Now, carbonic acid dissociates into hydrogen and bicarbonate ions. Hemoglobin binds with hydrogen and allows bicarb to enter the plasma. Deoxyhemoglobin combines with carbon dioxide, and venous blood transports the majority of the carbon dioxide back to the lungs to be exhaled. Regulation or respiration is necessary to ensure sufficient oxygen intake and carbon dioxide elimination to meet the demands of the body. Neural regulation involves the central nervous system, which controls the respiratory rate, depth, and rhythm. The cerebral cortex regulates the voluntary control of respiration by delivering impulses to the respiratory motor neurons by way of the spinal cord. Chemical respiration maintains rate and depth of respirations by changes in CO2, oxygen, and hydrogen in the blood. Now, changes in chemical levels stimulate neural regulators to adjust rate and depth of ventilation to maintain normal arterial blood gas levels. I am going to pause this recording here, and I will pick up in the next one.